There is a place on the roof of the world where the stones do not make sense. You are there now. You are standing on a high plateau in the thin dark of a Bolivian night, nearly 4,000 meters above the sea, and the air is so cold and so clean that it feels like drinking water. Each breath is shallow, deliberate. There is not enough oxygen here for carelessness. Your lungs reach for what they need and find less than they expected, less than they are accustomed to. So you breathe slowly, carefully, consciously, and with each breath, the cold enters you, settles into you. It becomes part of you. The sky above is not a sky you recognize. At this altitude, with no city light for 100 kilometers in any direction, the stars are not distant, they are close, impossibly close. They press down upon you like a weight, like a blanket made of light. Thousands upon thousands of them, millions of them, so dense in places that they merge into a continuous glow. The Milky Way is not a suggestion here. It is a river, a great luminous flood of ancient light pouring across the sky from horizon to horizon. Bright enough to cast shadows, bright enough to read by, bright enough to make you understand why the people who lived here believed the sky was a world of its own. And beneath that impossible sky, scattered across the hard, dry earth around you, are stones. Not natural stones, not boulders left by glaciers or tumbled from mountains. These stones have been shaped, cut, worked with a precision that stops you mid-breath. Even in this dim starlight you can see it. The edges are too straight, the angles too clean, the surfaces too flat. These are not the work of nature. These are the work of hands and minds and intentions that you cannot quite comprehend, because the tools available to those hands, the knowledge available to those minds, should not have been sufficient for what you see before you. You reach down, you touch one of the stones. It is cold, ice cold. The frost is already forming on its surface, a thin crystalline film that crunches faintly beneath your fingertips. The stone is hard, harder than you expected. This is andesite, volcanic rock, one of the hardest materials on the surface of the earth. And someone, a very long time ago, cut it the way a carpenter cuts wood, with precision, with intention, with the confidence of absolute mastery. This is Pumapunku, the place where the stones should not exist, the place where the impossible was made ordinary, the place where human hands achieved what modern engineers struggle to explain. You stand very still. The cold presses against your cheeks. The silence wraps around you like cloth. Somewhere far away, impossibly far, a dog barks in one of the Aymara villages that dot the plateau. The sound carries across the empty landscape with startling clarity, then fades, absorbed by the distance and the dark. You are alone with the stones, alone with the stars, alone with a mystery that has no name but demands attention nevertheless. Let yourself be here. Let the cold settle around you like a cloak. Let the thin air slow your breathing to something deep and rhythmic and unhurried. There is no rush tonight. There is nowhere else you need to be. There is only this high plateau, these scattered stones, and the slow unfolding of a story that is 1,500 years old. Breathe in, the air tastes of nothing, of absolute nothing. It is the cleanest air you have ever drawn into your lungs. No pollution, no pollen, no moisture, just oxygen and nitrogen and the faintest trace of frost, thin and cold and sharp, like breathing crystal. Breathe out, feel your shoulders drop, feel the tension in your neck release, feel your body settle into its own weight, heavy and warm beneath your layers of wool and fleece, while the universe wheels overhead and the ancient stones keep their patient silence all around you. To understand Pumapunku, you must first understand where it stands. you must understand this landscape, this vast and impossible landscape that stretches in every direction like the surface of another planet. You are on the Altiplano, the high plateau, the roof of South America. It lies between the two great cordilleras of the Andes, the Western Cordillera and the Eastern Cordillera, like a broad, flat valley slung between two walls of mountains. But to call it a valley is to misunderstand its scale. The Altiplano stretches for nearly 1,000 kilometers from north to south, from southern Peru through western Bolivia and into the fringes of northern Chile and Argentina. It is one of the largest high-altitude plateaus on Earth, exceeded only by the Tibetan Plateau on the other side of the world. And it is high, extraordinarily high. The average elevation is around 3,750 meters, nearly 4 kilometers above the sea. At this altitude, the air pressure is roughly 60% of what it is at sea level. Each breath delivers 60% of the oxygen your body expects. Your heart beats faster to compensate. Your blood thickens over time, producing more red blood cells to carry what little oxygen there is. People who live here permanently. The Aymara, the Quechua, have evolved over thousands of years to survive in this thin air. Their chests are broader, their lungs larger, their blood richer in hemoglobin. They are adapted to a world that would leave a lowlander gasping within minutes of arrival. The landscape is sparse, austere, beautiful in the way that emptiness can be beautiful. The earth is brown and ochre and pale gold, dotted with low, tough grasses that the wind combs flat. Iku grass, bunch grass, coarse and wiry and perfectly adapted to the cold and the drought and the relentless ultraviolet radiation that hammers down through the thin atmosphere. There are few trees. At this altitude, very few trees can survive. The occasional quinua. A small, twisted, slow-growing tree with peeling red bark clings to sheltered valleys and rocky outcrops. But for the most part, the Altiplano is grass and sky and distance. And water, there is water here, improbable water, extraordinary water. Lake Titicaca lies to the north of where you stand, perhaps 60 kilometers away, though distance is deceptive on the Altiplano. The air is so clear, the horizon so uninterrupted, that things which appear close are often impossibly far. But Titicaca is there. You can feel its presence even if you cannot see it from here, the way you might feel the presence of the sea from a coastal town, an awareness of something vast and liquid and alive just beyond the edge of your perception. Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake in the world. It sits at 3,812 meters above sea level, a body of water so large it creates its own weather systems. Its surface area exceeds 8,000 square kilometers. It is over 280 meters deep at its deepest point. It straddles the border between Peru and Bolivia, claimed by both, belonging to neither. Belonging only to itself and to the people who have lived upon its shores and upon its waters for thousands of years. The lake is impossibly blue, a blue so deep and so saturated that it seems artificial, as though someone has poured pigment into a basin the size of a small country. The blue comes from the altitude, from the thin atmosphere that filters less of the sky's color, from the extraordinary clarity of the water itself, fed by glacial melt and mountain streams that carry almost no sediment. On a calm day, the surface of Titicaca is a mirror, a perfect mirror. The sky reflected in the water, and the water reflecting the sky, until the boundary between them disappears, and the entire world becomes a single, continuous, breathless blue. More than 20 rivers feed into the lake. Only one, the Desaguadero, flows out. and even that outflow accounts for only a small fraction of the water loss. Most of the water that enters Lake Titicaca leaves by evaporation, drawn up into the thin, dry air by the fierce highland sun. The lake is old, millions of years old. It has survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions and the slow upheaval of the Andes themselves. It has been larger than it is now, in wetter periods. Titicaca expanded to cover much of the southern Altiplano, merging with what are now separate lake basins and salt flats. The Sala de Uyuni, the world's largest salt flat, is the dried remnant of an ancient superlake that once covered this entire region. The white crust of salt that stretches to the horizon in every direction is the ghost of water, the memory of rain. The Isla del Sol sits in the Bolivian portion of the lake, a hilly island with terraced slopes and stone ruins and views across the water that take your breath away even before the altitude does. In Inca mythology, this was where the sun was born, where Inti first rose from the waters, where the world began. The Tiwanaku revered the lake long before the Inca. To them, it was the source of all water, all fertility, all life. The raised fields that sustained their civilization depended on the moisture that the lake provided. The rains that filled the channels between the Waru beds came from weather systems generated by the lake itself. Without Titicaca, there could have been no Tiwanaku. Without the lake, there could have been no Pumapunku. The impossible stones owe their existence, ultimately, to water. Reed boats move across the surface of the lake. Totora reed boats, made from bundles of dried reeds lashed together into elegant, curving hulls with high, swept prows. The Yuru people, the ancient lake dwellers who call themselves the people of the water, have been building these boats for centuries. They build their islands from reeds too, floating islands that they anchor in the shallows near the shore, living their entire lives on a surface that shifts and gives and undulates with every wave. They walk on reeds, they eat from reeds, they sleep on reeds. Their world is woven from the lake itself. Aymara live on the solid shores of Titicaca and across the wider Altiplano. They have farmed here for thousands of years, adapting to conditions that would defeat most agricultural traditions. Potatoes, the original home of the potato, is here, on the shores of this lake, in the cold, thin air of this high plateau. Over 4,000 varieties of potato have been cultivated in the Andes, more than anywhere else on Earth. The Aymara freeze-dry them in the night frost and then reconstitute them. A preservation technique called chunyu that produces a lightweight, durable food that can last for years. They herd llamas and alpacas on the plains, the camelids of the New World, hardy, sure-footed animals with soft wool and gentle eyes, and a stubbornness that borders on philosophy. The sunsets on the Altiplano are legendary. When the sun drops toward the western Cordillera in the late afternoon, the sky does not simply darken, it transforms. The thin atmosphere, with so little moisture to diffuse the light, produces colors of extraordinary intensity. The horizon burns, not orange, not pink, something beyond both. A color that has no name in English, a color that exists only at altitude. A deep, saturated, almost violent crimson that bleeds upward into bands of gold and amber, and finally into a blue so deep it is almost purple. The light catches the snow on the distant peaks and turns them to fire. The iku grass glows, the earth glows. For perhaps 20 minutes, everything on the Altiplano is bathed in a light so warm and so rich that it feels like a benediction. And then it is gone. The sun drops below the mountains. The color drains from the sky. The temperature plummets, and the stars appear, not gradually, not one by one, but all at once, as though someone has drawn back a curtain to reveal the universe behind it. The nights are cold, bitterly cold, without the moisture that lowland atmospheres use to trap heat. The Altiplano radiates its warmth directly into space. The temperature can drop 30 degrees between midday and midnight. Frost forms on every surface. Ice crystals grow in the shallow puddles and the edges of streams. The ground cracks with cold, and the silence of a high desert night, is so profound that it becomes a sound in itself. A ringing emptiness that fills your ears the way darkness fills your eyes. Let yourself see this landscape, this vast, spare, wind-scoured plateau beneath a sky so large it makes you feel small, the brown earth stretching to every horizon, the blue lake glinting in the distance, the iku grass bending in the wind, the llamas standing in clusters, their wool ruffling, their dark eyes calm and untroubled. A landscape that looks empty but is not. A landscape that has supported human life for 10,000 years. A landscape that produced one of the most remarkable civilizations the Americas have ever known. The Tiwanaku civilization. Say the name slowly, Tiwanaku. It rolls in the mouth like a stone turned smooth by water. It is an old name, an ancient name, a name that was already old when the Inca arrived in this region and found the ruins and the legends and the people who remembered. Tiwanaku began as a small settlement on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, perhaps as early as 1500 BC, though some evidence suggests even earlier occupation. A village, a cluster of simple structures built by farmers and herders who had learned to survive in this extreme environment. For 1,000 years, it remained modest, unremarkable, one of many small communities scattered across the Altiplano. Each one eking out an existence in a landscape that offered little margin for error. But something changed. Around 500 BC, perhaps a little earlier, perhaps a little later, Tiwanaku began to grow, to consolidate, to transform itself from village to town to city to capital. The reasons are debated, perhaps a series of favorable harvests, perhaps a new agricultural technique, perhaps a charismatic leader or a unifying religious vision, perhaps all of these at once. Whatever the cause, the effect was unmistakable. Tiwanaku began to expand. The location was not accidental. Tiwanaku sat at a natural crossroads. The lake to the north provided fish and reed and water for irrigation. The mountains to the east offered access to the Yungas, the warm, wet, forested valleys that descend toward the Amazon basin, where coca and tropical fruit and hardwood timber could be obtained. The highlands to the south provided grazing land for llama and alpaca herds, and the distant coast to the west, accessible through passes in the western Cordillera, offered marine resources and the salt that every inland community craved. Tiwanaku was positioned at the center of a web of trade routes that connected radically different ecological zones, and whoever controlled Tiwanaku controlled that web. And what it became was extraordinary. By the middle of the first millennium AD, Tiwanaku was a city of perhaps 40,000 people, 40,000, on a high plateau where the air is thin and the growing season is short and the nights are bitterly cold. Think about what that means. Think about the organization required, the agricultural output required, the social structures required to keep 40,000 people alive and fed and sheltered at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. The Tiwanaku solved this problem with genius. Their agricultural system was a marvel of engineering, a technique known as raised field agriculture. They constructed long, raised platforms of earth, waru-waru in the local language, elevated above the surrounding ground by perhaps a meter. Between the raised beds, they dug channels and filled them with water. The water absorbed heat from the sun during the day and released it slowly at night, creating a microclimate around the crops that was several degrees warmer than the surrounding air. This was enough. In a place where a single night of hard frost could destroy an entire harvest, this was enough. The raised fields protected the crops. The channels irrigated them. Fish grew in the channels, providing protein. The muck from the channel bottoms was used as fertilizer. It was an integrated system of remarkable sophistication. And it worked so well that modern experiments recreating Tiwanaku raised fields have produced crop yields significantly higher than modern farming methods on the same land. The reach of Tiwanaku extended far beyond the city itself. At its peak, between roughly 500 and 900 AD, the Tiwanaku influence spread across an area that modern scholars sometimes describe as an empire, though whether it was an empire in the traditional sense, with military conquest and direct political control, or something more like a religious and cultural sphere of influence, remains a matter of scholarly debate. Tiwanaku enclaves have been found in the Moquegua Valley of southern Peru, in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, in the highlands of northwest Argentina. These were not mere trading posts. They were communities that shared Tiwanaku architecture, Tiwanaku ceramics, Tiwanaku religious iconography. They were outposts of a worldview, a civilization that extended its reach not only through trade and diplomacy, but through the power of its ideas. The semi-subterranean temple at the main Tiwanaku site gives you a sense of the religious architecture. It is a rectangular courtyard sunk below ground level, lined with finely cut stone walls. Set into those walls are dozens of carved stone heads, faces in various styles, some realistic, some grotesque, some serene, staring inward from all four walls. At the center of the courtyard stand carved stone monoliths. Tall, rectangular figures with stylized faces and elaborate clothing and objects held in their stone hands. The Bennett monolith, the largest of these figures, stands over 7 meters tall and weighs an estimated 20 tons. It was carved from a single block of red sandstone. A single block. 7 meters of stone shaped into a human figure of hieratic dignity, staring with blank eyes across the courtyard toward the walls of watching faces. They built with stone, enormous stone. The capital city of Tiwanaku, just a kilometer or so from Pumapunku, was a ceremonial and political center of imposing grandeur. The Akapana, a stepped pyramid that once rose to a height of over 18 meters, was constructed from enormous blocks of stone and filled with earth. It was not a simple pile. It was a precisely engineered structure with internal drainage channels that carried rainwater through the pyramid in a controlled, symbolic flow from top to bottom, possibly representing the flow of water from the mountains to the lake. Water as sacred, water as power, water as the lifeblood of a civilization built on the edge of what is habitable. Let yourself drift with this for a moment. Let the image form in your mind, slowly, gently, without effort. A city at the top of the world, stone buildings rising from the brown earth, broad ceremonial plazas where thousands could gather, the Akapana pyramid dominating the skyline, priests in woven robes, farmers returning from the raised fields, llama caravans arriving from distant valleys, carrying maize from the lowlands, coca leaves from the eastern slopes, dried fish from the coast. A city that was also a crossroads, a marketplace, a temple, a seat of power. The people of Tiwanaku were artists. Their ceramics are among the finest produced in the pre-Columbian Americas. The kero, a tall, flared drinking cup, was their signature form, decorated with geometric patterns and stylized figures, jaguars, condors, serpents, human faces with elaborate headdresses and weeping eyes. The weeping eye motif appears again and again in Tiwanaku art, tears streaming from the eyes of gods and rulers. Scholars debate what it means: grief, ecstasy. The rain falling from the sky, the water flowing from the mountains, perhaps all of these things at once. Perhaps the Tiwanaku understood, as many cultures have understood, that the boundary between sorrow and joy is thinner than we like to believe. Their textiles were extraordinary too, woven from the wool of alpacas and vicuñas, dyed in brilliant reds and blues and golds with pigments extracted from insects and minerals and plants. The weaving was tight and complex, tapestry weave, with hundreds of threads per inch. Some of these textiles have survived 1,000 years in the dry air of the Altiplano, their colors still vivid, their patterns still sharp, a testament to the skill of the hands that made them. But it is the stonework that stops you. It is the stonework that brings you here tonight. It is the stonework that makes the Tiwanaku civilization unlike any other in the ancient Americas. And it is the stonework of Pumapunku that pushes the boundaries of what we believe was possible with the tools and knowledge available. Pumapunku, the name means the door of the Puma in Aymara. It is part of the Tiwanaku complex, located just south of the main ceremonial center. It was built sometime around 536 to 600 AD, though dating remains imprecise. It was a temple, a platform temple, a sacred structure built atop a great stone platform, the Plataforma Litica. That was itself a feat of engineering, so ambitious it still leaves archaeologists shaking their heads. The Puma was sacred to the Tiwanaku, as the jaguar was sacred to the Maya and the eagle to the Aztec. The Puma occupied a central place in Tiwanaku cosmology. It was a creature of power, of stealth, of the mountains and the high places. The Puma moved through the landscape the way the priests wished to move through the spiritual realm, silently, purposefully, with an authority that did not need to announce itself. To name a temple after the Puma was to declare it a place of primal power, a threshold between worlds, a door through which something sacred might pass. The dating of Pumapunku has been refined over the decades, but remains somewhat uncertain. Radiocarbon dating of organic material found within the structure suggests construction began around 536 AD, though some researchers argue for a slightly earlier or later date. What is clear is that Pumapunku was built during the height of Tiwanaku power, during the period when the civilization had the resources, the workforce, the organizational capacity, and the ambition to undertake a project of this scale and complexity. The platform, start with the platform, before the famous H-blocks, before the precision cutting, before the mystery, there is the platform itself. The Plataforma Litica is a massive stone terrace, roughly 167 meters long and 116 meters wide. It was constructed from enormous red sandstone blocks, some of the largest stones ever moved by human hands in the ancient world. The single largest block at Pumapunku weighs an estimated 131 tons. 131 tons, think about that number, let it settle in your mind. Imagine the weight of it. A fully loaded Boeing 757 aircraft weighs roughly 100 tons at takeoff. This stone weighs more than that, and it was quarried, shaped, transporting, and placed into position by people who had no iron tools, no steel, no wheels, no pulleys that we know of. No draft animals capable of pulling such weight. The red sandstone was quarried from a site roughly 10 kilometers away. 10 kilometers of Altiplano, flat, yes, but at nearly 4,000 meters altitude, where the air is thin and every physical effort is magnified by the lack of oxygen. Moving a 131-ton block of stone across 10 kilometers of high-altitude terrain is not simply difficult. It is a logistical challenge of the first order. It requires planning, organization. A workforce numbered in the hundreds, if not thousands. Ropes woven from plant fibers or llama hide. Log rollers or sledges or some combination of both. Ramps and levers, and an intimate understanding of physics that may not have been expressed in mathematical notation, but was understood in the hands and the muscles and the practical intelligence of the builders. The other large sandstone blocks at the site are scarcely less impressive. Several weigh between 40 and 80 tons. Even the smaller structural stones weigh several tons each, and all of them were quarried, shaped, and moved to the site without the benefit of any technology that we would consider essential for such work. No cranes, no wagons, no roads in the modern sense. Just the intelligence and organization and sheer physical effort of a people determined to build something that would endure. Consider the ramps. The platform at Pumapunku rises several meters above the surrounding ground. The stones had to be lifted to their final positions. How? The most plausible answer is earthen ramps, long, gently sloping ramps of packed earth along which the stones could be dragged or rolled upward. Such ramps are labor-intensive to build and maintain, but they are effective. The Egyptians used them. The Mesopotamians used them. The builders of Pumapunku almost certainly used them too. Each ramp would have been a construction project in itself, requiring thousands of baskets of earth carried and dumped and compacted. And when the construction was complete, the ramps would have been removed, disassembled and carted away, leaving the platform standing clean and sharp against the sky. And the red sandstone was only part of it. The other stone used at Pumapunku is andesite, and andesite is something else entirely. Andesite is a volcanic rock. It is formed from magma of intermediate composition, more silica than basite, less than granite, and it is hard, extraordinarily hard, on the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, where talc is 1 and diamond is 10, andesite rates approximately 6 to 7. For context, ordinary steel rates about 6.5. You are dealing with a stone that is as hard as the tools you might use to cut it, harder in some cases. Cutting andesite with stone tools is not impossible, but it is slow, painstaking. It requires enormous patience and skill and an almost meditative commitment to the task. The andesite at Pumapunku was quarried from Cerro Carpia, a volcanic formation roughly 90 kilometers to the south, 90 kilometers, across the Altiplano. Blocks of this material weighing several tons each were transporting nearly 100 kilometers to the construction site. How? We are not entirely certain. The most widely accepted theory involves a combination of log rollers and human muscle, with the possibility that some transport occurred by reed boat across parts of Lake Titicaca when the lake level was higher than it is today. But even with boats, the logistics are staggering. Each block had to be quarried from the mountainside, shaped roughly at the quarry to reduce weight, transporting to the lake or to the overland route, moved across the water or across the land, delivered to Pumapunku, and then cut with a precision that defies easy explanation. Let the wind move across you now. The Altiplano wind. It comes from the west, from the distant Pacific, rising over the Andes and spilling across the plateau in long, cold, steady currents that never quite stop. It is not a fierce wind tonight, not a storm wind, just a constant, low, murmuring flow of air that moves across the grass and across the scattered stones and across your face with a touch that is both cold and oddly gentle, like a hand brushing your hair from your forehead. Like a whisper that has no words. The stars shift imperceptibly overhead. The Southern Cross hangs low on the horizon, tilted at an angle that looks unfamiliar if you are accustomed to northern skies. Beside it, the two bright pointers, Alpha and Beta Centauri, burning steadily in the thin, clear air. The Magellanic Clouds are visible too, two faint smudges of light that are not clouds at all but entire galaxies, satellite galaxies of our own Milky Way, each containing billions of stars. Visible only from the southern hemisphere, only from places dark enough and clear enough and high enough to reveal them. The Tiwanaku would have known these smudges of light. They would have had names for them, stories about them. They were people who watched the sky with attention and reverence, and the sky rewarded them with a display that most people on Earth will never see. You are warm despite the cold. The layers of wool and fleece trap your body heat against your skin, and the stillness of the night air means there is little wind chill to steal it away. You are wrapped the way the Aymara wrap themselves, in layers of natural fiber, each layer trapping a thin film of air, each film of air acting as insulation, the combined effect creating a cocoon of warmth that the Altiplano cold cannot penetrate. The outermost layer is thick wool, almost stiff. Rough against your chin where it rides up near your face. Beneath that, softer fleece. Beneath that, cotton against your skin. And beneath the cotton, your body, warm, alive, generating heat the way all living things generate heat, through the slow combustion of food and oxygen. The ancient metabolic fire that has burned in every human body since the first human drew the first breath. You could stay here for hours. You could stay here all night, watching the stars, listening to the wind, breathing the thin, clean, cold air of the high plateau, and the stones, the ancient, impossible stones, would keep you company. Now the H-blocks, the famous H-blocks of Pumapunku. This is what you came for. This is what everyone who has ever heard of this place comes for. This is what makes Pumapunku unlike any other ancient site on Earth. This is the thing that makes engineers pause, that makes skeptics fall silent, that makes anyone who has ever worked with their hands stare in quiet disbelief. Imagine a block of andesite, roughly 1 meter long and half a meter wide. Now imagine that someone has cut it into a shape that looks like the letter H viewed from above. Two parallel channels running along the length of the block, separated by a raised central ridge. The channels are uniform in width, uniform in depth. The walls of the channels are vertical, perfectly vertical, meeting the bottom of each channel at a precise 90-degree angle. The bottom of each channel is flat, perfectly flat. Not roughly flat, not approximately flat, flat to within fractions of a millimeter. Run your hand along the surface, if you could. If you were allowed to touch these stones, your fingers would find a surface as smooth as polished marble. Smoother, perhaps. The andesite has been worked to a finish that modern stonecutters would describe as a ground finish, achieved today with diamond-tipped tools and precision grinding machines. The Tiwanaku achieved it with, what? Stone hammers, abrasive sand, time? The answer is probably yes to all three. But the answer feels insufficient when you look at the results. The H-blocks were not decorative, they were functional. They were part of a modular construction system, a system of interlocking stone components that fitted together like pieces of a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. The channels in the H-blocks accepted corresponding ridges on adjacent blocks, locking them together laterally. Smaller eye-shaped clamps, cut from a different stone or cast from copper, were inserted into grooves to hold the blocks together. It was an interlocking system. A modular system. a system that a modern engineer would recognize immediately because it follows the same principles that underlie modern prefabricated construction. This is the detail that gets lost in the spectacle. This is the part that matters most. The H-blocks were not individually crafted one-off pieces. They were standardized, interchangeable. You could take one H-block and replace it with another and the system would still work because the dimensions were consistent. The channels were the same width, the same depth. The ridges were the same height. This implies something extraordinary. This implies the existence of a standard unit of measurement, a template, a quality control process. This implies that the Tiwanaku stonemasons were not simply skilled artisans. They were engineers working within a system of precision, a system of repeatability, a system that presupposes planning and design and standardization at a level that we more commonly associate with industrial manufacturing than with ancient stonework. The blocks have drill holes, uniform drill holes of consistent diameter, bored into the andesite with what appears to be a tubular drill, a hollow cylindrical tool that cuts a ring-shaped groove and leaves a cylindrical core. The drill holes are clean, consistent. They do not wander or waver. They suggest a tool held steady, possibly in some kind of jig or frame, rotating under pressure against the stone surface while abrasive sand did the actual cutting. The technique is well understood. It is the execution that astonishes. The precision of the execution, the consistency of the execution, repeated across dozens of blocks, each one as clean and uniform as the last. Let yourself think about the hands that did this work, not in the abstract, not as a historical concept, but as a physical reality. There were people here, real people, with calloused hands and aching muscles and tired eyes. They got up in the morning, they ate breakfast, probably a porridge made from quinoa or a stew of freeze-dried potatoes. They walked to the construction site in the cold dawn light. They picked up their tools, tools made of stone and bone and copper, and they began to work. Picture the work site at the height of construction. Hundreds of workers, perhaps more, some quarrying, some transporting, some cutting, some grinding, some mixing mortar or casting copper clamps or weaving the ropes that were used to move the stones. A small city of labor supporting the construction of a temple. The air would have been filled with sound, the rhythmic pounding of stone on stone, the scraping of abrasive sand, the shouts of foremen coordinating the movement of heavy blocks. The creak of rope under tension, the low chanting of work songs, because people everywhere, in every culture, in every age, have sung while they worked. The Tiwanaku would have been no different. They would have had songs for quarrying and songs for transporting and songs for the slow, patient work of grinding a surface flat. Music to keep the rhythm, music to pass the time, music to transform labor into something closer to ritual. The cutting would have been slow, extraordinarily slow. You do not cut andesite the way you cut limestone or sandstone. Andesite resists, it fights back. Every millimeter of material removed represents hundreds of strikes with a stone hammer or hours of grinding with abrasive sand and water. The sound of it would have filled the air, a steady rhythmic pounding, like a heartbeat, like the pulse of the earth itself, day after day, week after week, month after month, each block taking, what? Weeks to complete, months, we do not know, but we know it was slow. We know it required patience beyond what most modern people could imagine. We know it required a commitment to the task that borders on devotion. And these were not slaves. The evidence suggests a labor tax, a meter system, similar to what the Inca would later employ. Communities across the Tiwanaku sphere of influence contributed workers for construction projects as a form of tribute. These workers were fed and housed and presumably took pride in their contribution to a project of religious and civic importance. They were building a temple, a sacred space. A place where the boundary between the human world and the divine world was meant to dissolve. Every stone they cut was an offering. Every surface they polished was a prayer. Think about the copper. The Tiwanaku used copper clamps to bind certain stones together. Small I-shaped or T-shaped pieces of copper were cast in place. Molten copper poured into grooves cut into the upper surfaces of adjoining blocks. When the copper cooled and solidified, it locked the blocks together. This technique requires metallurgical knowledge. You need to be able to smelt copper ore, heat it to over 1,000 degrees Celsius, and pour it with sufficient control to fill a narrow groove without spilling. The Tiwanaku did this at nearly 4,000 meters altitude, where fire burns less fiercely because there is less oxygen, where achieving and maintaining the temperatures required for copper smelting is significantly more challenging than at sea level. They solved this problem too, probably with forced air bellows or with the wind itself, channeled and directed through clay furnaces to achieve the necessary heat. The copper clamps have been found in situ at Pumapunku. They are physical proof that the Tiwanaku possessed not only stoneworking skills, but metallurgical capabilities of considerable sophistication. The precision. Let us return to the precision, because the precision is the thing that separates Pumapunku from every other ancient site you might visit. In the 21st century, with tools that the Tiwanaku could not have imagined, we have attempted to understand what they achieved. Modern engineers and archaeologists have measured the stones of Pumapunku with laser scanning equipment and coordinate measuring machines. The results are startling. The flat surfaces are flat to tolerances that rival modern machining. Fractions of a millimeter on some surfaces. The deviation from perfect flatness is measured in hundredths of a millimeter. This is not the kind of accuracy you achieve by eyeballing. This is not the kind of accuracy you achieve with rough hand tools. This is the kind of accuracy that requires something, a technique, a method, a technology of measurement and correction that we have not yet fully identified. The right angles are right, not approximately right, not close enough, right, 90 degrees, internal corners where two surfaces meet at precisely 90 degrees, sharp and clean and uniform. If you have ever tried to cut a perfect right angle in any hard material with hand tools, you will understand why this is remarkable. Right angles are difficult. They require the tool to change direction without curving, without rounding the corner, without leaving the slightest deviation from geometric perfection. And the Tiwanaku achieved this in andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, with tools that were softer than the material they were cutting. Some blocks have been found with complex three-dimensional shapes, steps that descend in precise increments, channels that turn corners at exact right angles, surfaces that change plane in sharp, clean transitions. One particularly famous block has a series of precisely cut recesses, each one identical to the last, arranged in a pattern that suggests a decorative or functional purpose that we have not yet fully understood. The block looks machined. There is no other word for it. It looks as though someone fed a block of andesite into a milling machine and programmed a series of cuts. But there was no milling machine. There was no electricity. There was no steel. There was only stone and sand and water and time, and the patient, relentless skill of hands that understood their material the way a musician understands an instrument. How did they check their work? How did they verify that a surface was truly flat? that an angle was truly right. Modern machinists use precision straightedges and squares, tools machined to tolerances tighter than the work they are checking. Did the Tiwanaku have something equivalent? A master template? A reference surface? It seems likely. It seems almost certain. You cannot achieve this level of precision without a way to measure it, but no such tools have been found. The stones survive. The methods by which they were made remain largely a mystery. The most widely accepted theory involves a combination of techniques. Stone hammers, made from harder stones such as quartzite or basalt, were used for the initial rough shaping, pecking and pounding, removing material in small chips and fragments, gradually reducing the block to approximately the correct shape. Then came the grinding, using flat stones as rubbing surfaces, with water and fine abrasive sand as the cutting medium. The masons would have ground the surfaces flat. The same principle that operates in modern surface grinding, two surfaces rubbed together tend to wear each other flat, would have applied here, with enough patience, with enough skill, with enough time. Extraordinary precision is achievable through grinding alone. But the internal right angles, the drill holes, the complex three-dimensional shapes, these require more than simple grinding. These require techniques we can hypothesize but not definitively confirm. Copper tools used with abrasive sand, thin stone blades used as saws, templates and guides made from shaped stone or wood. Each theory is plausible, none is fully proven. The mystery persists, not because the achievement is impossible to explain, but because the specific techniques have been lost. Consider what we do know about ancient stone cutting techniques elsewhere in the world. The Egyptians cut granite with copper tools and abrasive sand. The Romans cut marble with iron saws and water. In both cases, the metal tool does not cut the stone directly. The metal is softer than the stone. Instead, the tool acts as a carrier for the abrasive, pressing the sand or quartz particles against the stone surface under sustained pressure. And it is the abrasive that does the actual cutting. This is a slow process, but it is effective, and it is capable of extraordinary precision because each pass of the tool removes only a tiny amount of material, allowing the craftsman to approach the desired dimension gradually, checking frequently, correcting as needed. The Tiwanaku almost certainly used a similar approach. The copper chisels that have been found at the site are too soft to cut andesite directly, but used as carriers for abrasive sand, with water as a lubricant to flush away the waste material and keep the work cool. They would have been effective, slow, demanding, requiring constant resharpening and replacement, but effective. The evidence is in the stones themselves, the surface finish, the regularity of the drill holes. The cleanness of the cuts all point to abrasive cutting rather than direct percussion. The masons were not chipping at the stone, they were wearing it away, grain by grain, pass by pass, hour by hour, day by day, until perfection was achieved. Pause here, rest here. Let the cold air of the Altiplano wash over you like water. You are lying down now. You can feel the ground beneath you, hard and cold through the blanket spread beneath your body. Above you, the sky is a dome of stars, so thick and so bright that it seems solid, a ceiling of light rather than an expanse of darkness. The Milky Way pours across the zenith like spilled milk, like cream, like a river of luminous fog flowing through the night. The Southern Cross burns with a steady, unwavering blue-white light. The air is absolutely still. The wind has dropped to nothing. The silence is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat, can hear the blood moving through the vessels in your ears, a low, rhythmic rush that sounds like the ocean heard from very far away. The stones are all around you. You can sense them in the darkness even where you cannot see them clearly. Dark shapes against the dark earth, some upright, some tumbled on their sides, some half buried in the soil, only their worked surfaces visible, catching the starlight on their polished faces. They are patient. They have been patient for 1,500 years. They will be patient for 1,500 more. They do not care that you are here. They do not care that you are leaving. They simply are. Cold and hard and precise and perfect, lying where the earthquake left them, waiting for nothing. Breathe in slowly. Let the thin cold air fill your lungs. Feel your ribcage expand. Feel the cold travel down into the deepest parts of your lungs, into the tiny alveoli where gas is exchanged, where oxygen crosses from air to blood, where the essential transaction of life occurs 20,000 times a day without your conscious participation. Breathe out, feel your body relax. Feel the warmth of the expelled air against your upper lip, the only warm thing in this cold, clear night. Feel your muscles soften, feel the weight of your body increase or seem to increase as you surrender to the pull of the earth beneath you. You are heavy, you are warm inside your cocoon of wool and fleece. You are safe. The stones watch over you the way they have watched over this plateau for a millennium and a half. Breathe in again, count to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, count to 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, in for 4, out for 6. Let each exhalation be slightly longer than the inhalation. Let each breath settle you deeper. Each breath is a step down a gentle staircase. Each breath takes you further from the waking world and closer to the place where sleep waits for you, patient and warm and welcoming. The ground beneath you, solid, unmoving. The Altiplano is one of the most geologically stable surfaces on the planet, despite the occasional earthquake. Beneath you are layers of sediment deposited over millions of years, lake beds, volcanic ash, alluvial plains, compressed and compacted and turned to stone and soil and the hard, flat surface upon which you rest. The earth is holding you. It has been holding things for 4.5 billion years. It knows how. It is very good at it. You can trust it completely. You can surrender your entire weight to it without the slightest fear. It will not let you fall. It will not shift beneath you. It will simply hold you, the way it holds the mountains, the way it holds the lake, the way it holds the stones of Pumapunku, steadily, patiently, without complaint, without end. The site as it exists today is a puzzle, a scattered puzzle. The great stones of Pumapunku lie strewn across the landscape as though a giant had appended a box of building blocks and walked away. The orderly structure that once stood here, the temple, the platform, the precisely fitted walls, has been reduced to rubble, but it is extraordinary rubble, rubble that makes you stop and stare, rubble that makes you kneel down and trace the edges with your fingers and wonder. What happened here? How did order become chaos? How did precision become rubble? The destruction of Pumapunku was not a single event, but a cascade of catastrophes spread across centuries. First, the earthquake or earthquakes. This region of the Andes is seismically active. The same tectonic forces that thrust the mountains upward continue to shift and settle and occasionally convulse. At some point, probably around the time of Tiwanaku's decline in the 10th or 11th century AD, a major seismic event struck the site. The precisely fitted stones were shaken apart. Walls that had stood for centuries collapsed. The interlocking system, so elegant in its design, was overwhelmed by forces that no amount of engineering could withstand. The stones fell, the temple crumbled, and the slow process of decay began. Then came the centuries of neglect. After the Tiwanaku civilization collapsed, the site was abandoned. The The Aymara people who remained in the region knew the ruins. They told stories about them. They attributed the construction to gods and giants because the scale and precision of the stonework seemed beyond the capacity of ordinary mortals. But they did not maintain the site. They did not rebuild. The stones lay where they had fallen. And the wind and the rain and the frost went to work on them. The patient, relentless forces of entropy that reduce all human works to dust given enough time. The Spanish arrived in the 16th century, conquistadors and priests and colonial administrators. They looked at Pumapunku and saw building material. They took stones from the site for the construction of churches and houses in nearby towns. They had no interest in preserving the work of a civilization they considered pagan. They had no understanding of what they were destroying. They simply saw cut stone, ready-made, conveniently available, and they carried it away. And then, in the 19th century, the railway came. A rail line was constructed through the area, and the builders used stones from Pumapunku as fill material for the railway bed. Precisely cut blocks of andesite, blocks that had taken Tiwanaku masons months to complete, were buried beneath iron tracks as though they were ordinary gravel. It is one of the small tragedies of history, not deliberate destruction, not malice, just ignorance. Just the inability to recognize the extraordinary when it is lying at your feet. There is something almost unbearably poignant about the site today. To walk among the scattered stones of Pumapunku is to walk through the wreckage of genius. Here is a block with a surface so flat you could use it as a mirror. There is a fragment with an internal corner so sharp it looks as though it was cut yesterday. Over there, half buried in the earth, a section of an H-block with its channels still clean and precise after 15 centuries of exposure, and all of it jumbled, disordered, turned out of alignment, like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle tipped from the box and scattered across the floor. You can see that they once fitted together. You can see the logic of the system, but you cannot reassemble it. Too many pieces are missing, taken by the Spanish, buried by the railway builders, lost to the wind and the rain and the frost and the simple entropy of time. Bolivian authorities have fenced the site. Visitors are asked to follow marked paths. There are guards and guides and information boards. The Bolivian government declared Tiwanaku a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2000, recognizing it as a site of outstanding universal value. But the protection came late. Centuries of damage cannot be undone. The stones that were carried away for church foundations and railway beds are gone forever. The knowledge that created them was gone long before that. What remains is fragmentary but still astonishing. The Plataforma Litica, the great stone platform, is still partially intact. You can see the massive red sandstone blocks that form its base, some of them weighing tens of tons, fitted together with a precision that belies their size. The famous H-blocks are scattered around the platform and across the surrounding area, some intact, some broken, all of them bearing witness to the skill of their makers. Archaeological work is ongoing. Every season brings new discoveries, new fragments, new pieces of the puzzle, and slowly, very slowly, the picture becomes clearer. Imagine it whole. Close your eyes, if they are not already closed, and imagine Pumapunku as it might have looked when it was new. Around 600 AD, the platform rising from the Altiplano like a great stone stage, its surface paved with precisely fitted slabs, walls of interlocking andesite blocks surrounding a central courtyard, each block fitting into its neighbor with such precision that a blade of grass could not be inserted between them, the H-blocks forming decorative panels, or structural elements, or both, the whole structure aligned with the cardinal directions, oriented to the sunrise and the sunset, and the movements of the stars. There would have been color. The stone may have been painted or plastered. Tiwanaku architecture at the nearby main site shows evidence of painted surfaces, brilliant reds and yellows and blues applied to the stone. Pumapunku may have blazed with color against the brown and gold of the Altiplano. Imagine it, a temple of red and gold rising from the high plateau, its stone surfaces catching the fierce Andean sunlight, visible for kilometers across the flat, treeless landscape, a beacon, a landmark. A statement of power and faith and the mastery of the material world. People would have gathered here, pilgrims from across the Tiwanaku sphere of influence, which at its height extended from southern Peru through western Bolivia and into northern Chile and Argentina. They would have climbed the steps to the platform. They would have passed through the doorways, the Puerta del Puma, the door of the Puma, from which the site takes its name. They would have entered the sacred precinct and participated in ceremonies we can only guess at. Offerings, prayers, sacrifices perhaps. The consumption of ritual foods and drinks. The smoke of burning incense rising into the thin air and dissipating in the Altiplano wind. The experience would have been overwhelming. Imagine approaching Pumapunku as a pilgrim from a distant village. You have walked for days, perhaps weeks, across the Altiplano, through cold nights and blazing days, and then you crest a rise in the terrain and you see it. The platform rising from the plain, the stone surfaces catching the sunlight, the walls perfectly plumb and perfectly straight, the colors painted on the stone glowing in the clear mountain light. You have never seen anything like it. Your village is made of adobe and thatch. Your tools are simple, your world is small, and here before you is a structure that seems to belong to the gods. A structure that speaks of power and knowledge and resources beyond anything you have encountered. The emotional impact would have been immense. The religious impact, incalculable. This was the point. This was the purpose. Pumapunku was not just a temple, it was a statement, a demonstration, a proof that the gods favored the Tiwanaku above all others. A kilometer to the northeast of Pumapunku, across a stretch of flat, dry earth where the iku grass whispers in the night wind, stands the gateway of the sun. It is not at Pumapunku itself. It is at the main Tiwanaku site, but it is part of the same story, the same civilization, the same artistic and engineering tradition, and it is one of the most iconic archaeological artifacts in the Americas. The Gateway of the Sun is a single block of andesite, approximately 3 meters tall and 4 meters wide, carved into the shape of a doorway. The lintel above the opening is covered in an intricate bas-relief carving of extraordinary complexity. At the center of the lintel stands a figure, a front-facing figure with an elaborate headdress radiating outward like the rays of the sun. In each hand, the figure holds a staff, one topped with what appears to be a condor head, the other with what may be a serpent. The figure's face has large, round eyes from which tears or rays descend, the weeping god motif that appears throughout Tiwanaku art. This is the figure that scholars call the staff deity. Some identify it with Viracocha, the creator god of Andean mythology, who is said to have risen from Lake Titicaca to create the sun, the moon, and the stars. Others suggest it represents Tunupa, the god of thunder and lightning. Others argue it is simply a representation of the sun itself, or a priest or ruler depicted in the guise of a deity. The truth is that we do not know. The Tiwanaku left no written records. Their beliefs, their myths, their theology must be reconstructed from their art and their architecture, and from the fragments of oral tradition that survived the centuries of upheaval that followed their collapse. Flanking the central figure are rows of smaller figures, winged beings in profile, running or marching toward the center. Some have the heads of condors, some have human faces. All carry staffs or weapons or ritual objects. There are 48 of them, arranged in 3 rows on either side of the central deity. Below them is a band of geometric designs, meanders and step patterns and circles that may encode astronomical or calendrical information. The calendar theory is compelling. Several researchers have proposed that the carvings on the gateway of the sun represent a solar calendar, with the 48 winged figures corresponding to periods within the solar year. The central figure may represent the sun at the solstice. The arrangement of the surrounding figures may encode information about the equinoxes, the planting and harvest seasons, the movements of the moon. If this interpretation is correct, the gateway of the sun is not merely art. It is a scientific instrument, a stone almanac, a record of astronomical knowledge carved in andesite for all eternity. The gateway itself may have served as an astronomical marker, positioned so that the rising or setting sun would align with the doorway at significant moments in the calendar, solstices or equinoxes. The gateway would have told the priests when to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate. This is not unusual. Many ancient cultures built astronomical alignments into their architecture, but the precision of the Tiwanaku carving, the complexity of the encoded information, the sheer beauty of the execution places the gateway of the sun among the finest achievements of ancient American art. The gateway was found broken. A large crack runs through the upper right portion of the lintel, suggesting that it was toppled at some point, perhaps by the same earthquake that scattered the stones of Pumapunku and struck the ground with enough force to fracture the stone. It now stands upright again, re-erected by archaeologists in the early 20th century, but it no longer sits in its original location. It has been moved, repositioned. It is an artifact out of context. Magnificent but displaced, like a painting removed from its frame and hung on a different wall. Nearby stands the gateway of the moon, a smaller doorway carved with similar but distinct imagery, and the Kalasasya, a large rectangular enclosure bounded by standing stones, within which the gateway of the sun may originally have stood. The Kalasasya appears to have been designed as an astronomical observatory. Its walls are oriented to mark the positions of the sun at the solstices and equinoxes. Standing at the center of the enclosure, looking east through the main entrance, you would see the sun rise at the equinox precisely framed by the gateway. At the solstices, the sun would rise at the northern or southern edges of the eastern wall. The entire structure is a calendar, a stone calendar, built by people who watched the sky with the same attention and precision with which they cut their stones. The wind picks up again, just slightly, a low murmur across the grass, barely more than a breath. The iku bends and straightens. The temperature has dropped another degree. You can feel it on your cheeks, on the tip of your nose, the only parts of your body exposed to the night air. Everything else is wrapped, insulated, warm. The llama wool blanket beneath you is thick and slightly rough, the fibers trapping air in tiny pockets, creating a barrier of warmth between your body and the cold earth. The fleece jacket holds your heat close. The woolen hat covers your ears. You are a warm island in a cold world, a small point of heat on a vast frozen plateau, and the contrast is oddly comforting. The cold makes the warmth more precious. The darkness makes the stars more brilliant. The silence makes the wind more musical. Let yourself sink deeper into the warmth. Let your body grow heavier against the ground. Feel the ground holding you. Feel the weight of yourself surrendered to the earth. You are supported, completely supported. Every square centimeter of your back, your shoulders, your hips, your legs, is resting on something solid and stable and ancient. This ground has been here for millions of years. The Altiplano was formed by tectonic forces tens of millions of years ago. The earth beneath you is old beyond comprehension, and tonight it holds you, as it held the builders of Pumapunku, as it held their children and their children's children, as it has held everything that has ever lived and breathed and slept upon this high, cold, beautiful plateau. The Tiwanaku civilization did not fall in a day. It declined over decades, perhaps over a century or more, and the cause, as with so many ancient collapses, was climate. Around 1000 AD, perhaps a few decades earlier, the climate of the Altiplano shifted. The rains that had sustained the raised fields and the crops and the lake for centuries began to fail. A prolonged drought settled over the region, not a drought of a season or a year, but a drought that lasted decades. Lake Titicaca shrank. Its waters retreated from shorelines that had been stable for centuries. The raised fields dried out. The microclimate that had protected the crops from frost ceased to function when the channels held no water. Harvests failed. Food became scarce, and a civilization that had thrived for over 1,000 years, that had built pyramids and temples and cities of extraordinary sophistication, began to come apart. The social fabric frayed, slowly at first, then more quickly when there is not enough food. The structures that hold a complex society together begin to fail. The meter system, the labor tax that had built Pumapunku, would have collapsed when communities could no longer spare workers from the desperate work of finding enough food to survive. The trade networks that had brought goods from the lowlands and the coast would have dried up as each community turned inward, hoarding what it had. Unwilling or unable to share, the priests at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku would have performed their rituals, would have made their offerings, would have pleaded with their gods for rain, but the rain did not come. By 1100 AD, perhaps earlier, the great city was empty. The monumental architecture stood abandoned. The raised fields reverted to scrubland. The carefully cut stones began their long, slow surrender to time and weather. The Aymara people remained on the Altiplano. They had been there before Tiwanaku, and they would remain long after. But the civilization that had built the impossible stones of Pumapunku was gone. The collapse was not unique. It was part of a broader pattern of climate-driven upheaval that affected much of the Andes during this period. The wary civilization, based in the highlands of central Peru, collapsed at roughly the same time and apparently for similar reasons. The coastal cultures of northern Peru experienced disruption. The entire Andean world was shaken by a climatic shift that may have lasted 2 or 3 centuries, the medieval warm period, which brought prosperity to much of Europe during these same centuries, appears to have brought drought to the South American highlands. The rains shifted, the monsoon patterns changed, and civilizations that had thrived for 1,000 years discovered that the margin between survival and collapse was thinner than they had imagined. There is a lesson in this, a quiet lesson, one that the stones of Pumapunku tell without speaking, that human achievement, however magnificent, however precise, however seemingly permanent, exists at the mercy of the systems that sustain it. The Tiwanaku could cut stone to the precision of a fraction of a millimeter, but they could not make it rain. They could build temples that would stand for millennia. But they could not prevent the drought that emptied those temples of the people who gave them meaning. The stones survive. The civilization does not, and the gap between the two, between the endurance of stone and the fragility of the society that shaped it, is the space where all the great lessons of history reside. The Inca came later, much later. They arrived in the Titicaca region in the 15th century, 400 or 500 years after the fall of Tiwanaku. They found the ruins. They marveled at them, according to the oral traditions recorded by Spanish chroniclers. The Inca looked at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku and concluded that the stones must have been placed by the gods, or by giants, or by the creator Viracocha himself in the first days of the world. Even the Inca themselves, no strangers to monumental stonework, could not comprehend how the Tiwanaku had achieved what they had achieved. The Inca incorporated the legends of Tiwanaku into their own mythology. Lake Titicaca became the place of origin, the sacred lake from which the first Inca rulers emerged at the command of the sun god Inti. Tiwanaku became a place of pilgrimage. The ruins became sacred ground, and the memory of the civilization that had built them became woven into the great tapestry of Andean legend, so thoroughly intertwined with myth that separating historical fact from religious narrative became, and remains, extraordinarily difficult. The Inca were themselves master stonemasons. The walls of Sacsayhuaman above Cusco, the temple of Coricancha, the precisely fitted walls of Ollantaytambo. These are among the finest examples of dry stone construction anywhere in the world. The Inca knew what good stonework looked like. They practiced it daily. They understood the techniques involved. And yet, when they looked at Pumapunku, they were baffled. The precision exceeded anything in their own repertoire. The hardness of the andesite, the complexity of the interlocking system, the sheer perfection of the flat surfaces and the right angles. This was stonework from another level of skill, another tradition entirely. And so they turned to myth, to the gods, to the creator who had risen from the lake and shaped the world from raw stone. It was the only explanation that seemed adequate to what they saw. The Spanish destroyed what the Inca had preserved, not deliberately, not entirely, but the colonial enterprise was catastrophic for the indigenous cultures of the Americas. Populations were devastated by disease, social structures were dismantled, religious practices were suppressed. The oral traditions that had kept the memory of Tiwanaku alive for centuries were disrupted, fragmented, lost. The chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon visited Tiwanaku in 1549 and wrote of enormous stones, so large that it causes wonder to think of them and to try to imagine what human strength was sufficient to transport them. He described doorways carved from single blocks. He described figures in stone. He described a ruin so vast and so impressive that even in its degraded state, it inspired awe. But he did not understand what he was seeing. He did not know who had built it or when or why. He was a stranger in a strange land, recording what his eyes told him without the context to interpret it. The Austrian engineer Arthur Posnansky spent decades studying Tiwanaku in the early 20th century. His measurements were careful. His dedication was extraordinary. His conclusions, particularly his dating of the site to several thousand years before the conventional estimates, were controversial and have largely been set aside by modern research. But his detailed drawings and photographs remain invaluable. He documented stones and structures that have since been further damaged or removed. He created a record that modern archaeologists rely upon, and his passion for the site, his conviction that it represented something extraordinary in human history, helped to bring Tiwanaku and Pumapunku to the attention of the wider world. By the time modern archaeologists began to study the site with the full arsenal of contemporary science, radiocarbon dating, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, laser scanning, chemical analysis. Much of what the Tiwanaku knew about themselves had vanished. Modern archaeology has been patient, meticulous. Teams of researchers from Bolivia, the United States, Europe, and elsewhere have spent decades mapping, measuring, excavating, and analyzing the remains of Pumapunku and the wider Tiwanaku complex. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed structures beneath the surface that have not yet been excavated. Three-dimensional scanning has created precise digital models of the surviving stones. Chemical analysis has identified the sources of the stone and the composition of the copper clamps that held the blocks together. Radiocarbon dating has established approximate timelines, and the work continues. Every year, every season, another piece of the puzzle. But there remains a gap between what we can see and what we can explain. We can see the precision of the H-blocks. We can measure it. We can photograph it and scan it and quantify it to the 100th of a millimeter. But we cannot fully explain how it was achieved. We know the tools that were available: stone hammers, copper chisels, abrasive sand, water, time. We can demonstrate that these tools are capable of producing fine work in hard stone. But the specific techniques, the specific sequences of operations, the jigs and templates and measuring devices, the quality control processes that ensured such remarkable consistency, these have been lost. They existed only in the hands and minds of the masons, and when those masons died, when their apprentices died, when the drought came and the civilization collapsed, and the knowledge was no longer passed from master to student, it disappeared. This is not unusual. This is not mysterious. This is how knowledge works. It is fragile. It exists in human minds and human hands, and when those minds and hands are gone, it is gone. We have lost more knowledge than we have preserved. The Library of Alexandria, the engineering techniques of the Roman Empire, the navigational methods of the Polynesian wayfinders, the surgical techniques of ancient Indian physicians. These things existed. They were known. They were practiced. And then they were lost, not because they were supernatural or alien or impossible, but because they were human, because human knowledge is transmitted from person to person, and when the chain breaks, what was known becomes unknown. This is why the alien theories are wrong, not because they are interesting in the way that any creative speculation is interesting, but because they rob the Tiwanaku of their achievement. When someone looks at the H-blocks of Pumapunku and says, aliens must have done this, what they are really saying is, I don't believe humans could have done this. And that is a failure of imagination, not an excess of it. The humans of the Tiwanaku civilization lived at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. They developed agricultural techniques that outperform modern methods. They built a city of 40,000 people in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. They created art of extraordinary beauty and sophistication. They engineered water management systems of remarkable ingenuity. And they cut stone with a precision that modern engineers find difficult to match, using only the tools available to them. These were remarkable people, brilliant people, resourceful, patient, determined, ingenious people who lived in one of the most challenging environments on Earth and thrived there for over 1,000 years. They deserve our admiration, not our disbelief. They deserve to be remembered as what they were: master engineers and artisans who pushed the boundaries of what was possible with the materials and knowledge available to them. To attribute their achievements to alien intervention is not to elevate the mystery. It is to diminish the achievement. It is to say that human beings, particularly human beings in the pre-Columbian Americas, could not possibly have been this clever, this skilled, this capable, and that is not only wrong, it is insulting. The stones of Pumapunku are extraordinary because they are human, because flawed, mortal, oxygen-deprived, copper tool-wielding human beings made them, because people who could not write, who had no iron, who had no wheels, looked at the hardest stone on the plateau and said, "We will cut this to the precision of a fraction of a millimeter." And then they did. That is not a mystery to be solved. That is a triumph to be celebrated. We do this to ourselves as a species. We look at the achievements of our ancestors and we cannot quite believe them. We build narratives of impossibility around things that were simply difficult. The pyramids of Egypt, the megalithic temples of Malta, the Moai of Easter Island, Göbekli Tepe, Nan Madol, and now Pumapunku. In each case, the scale and ambition and precision of the work seems to exceed what we believe ancient people were capable of, and in each case, the explanation is not alien intervention or lost technology or Atlantean wisdom. The explanation is human intelligence, human determination, human patience on a scale that our hurried modern minds struggle to comprehend. The Tiwanaku mason who spent 3 months grinding a single surface to perfect flatness was not performing a miracle. He was performing a task that required skill and patience and care, but a task nonetheless. The same kind of task that a modern watchmaker performs when assembling a movement with tolerances measured in microns. The same kind of task that a concert pianist performs when practicing a passage for the 1,000th time. Mastery looks like magic only to those who have never attempted it. To those who do the work, it is simply work, demanding work, satisfying work, but work. The night deepens around you. You can feel it deepening, the way you might feel the water rising in a bath, a slow accumulation of darkness and cold and silence that builds and builds until everything is submerged. The temperature continues to drop. On the Altiplano in the dry season, temperatures can fall to -15 or -20 degrees Celsius after midnight. The air is so dry that it holds almost no moisture, and without moisture, there is no insulating blanket of humidity to slow the escape of heat from the earth. The ground radiates its warmth into space. The stones radiate their warmth into space. Everything that was warmed by the day's fierce sun gives up its heat to the infinite cold of the cosmos above. But you are warm, you are wrapped in blankets now, llama wool and alpaca fleece, layers of warmth piled upon you like soft, heavy earth. The fibers are extraordinary. Llama wool is hollow, each fiber a tiny tube of protein filled with air, an insulator of remarkable efficiency. The Tiwanaku knew this. They used llama and alpaca wool for everything: clothing, blankets, rope, bags, tapestries. They wove it into fabrics of such quality that modern textile experts study them with reverence. And tonight, the same material that kept the Tiwanaku warm 1,000 years ago is keeping you warm. The same principle, the same physics, the same gentle, persistent, animal warmth trapped in hollow fibers and held against your skin. Feel it, feel the weight of the blankets, feel the warmth building beneath them, a warmth that is entirely your own, generated by your body and preserved by the wool. The wool does not create heat, it merely keeps what you already have. It is a boundary, a soft, warm, gentle boundary between you and the cold, between you and the night, between you and the vast, star-filled, ancient, empty sky above. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. Let the darkness behind your eyelids merge with the darkness of the Altiplano night. Let the two darknesses become one. There is nothing to see now, nothing to watch, nothing to track or follow or analyze, just darkness and warmth and the sound of your own breathing, steady and slow, each breath a little deeper than the last, each exhalation a little longer. Each cycle carrying you further from wakefulness and closer to the threshold where consciousness dissolves like frost in sunlight. The stones are out there, in the dark. You cannot see them, but you know they are there. The H-blocks with their impossible precision. The great red sandstone slabs of the Plataforma Litica. The scattered fragments of a temple that once stood proud against the Andean sky. They are there, patient, silent, holding their secrets in their cold, hard surfaces, and tonight, they are your guardians, your sentinels, standing watch while you sleep the way they have stood watch over this plateau for 15 centuries. Think of the Masons one last time, not as an abstract concept. As people, as individuals, a man, let us imagine, a man in his 30s, old by the standards of his time. His hands are thick and rough, the knuckles swollen, the skin of his palms like leather from decades of working stone. He has been a mason since he was a boy, since his uncle first placed a stone hammer in his hand and showed him how to strike, how to listen to the sound the stone makes when you hit it, how to read the fracture patterns, how to feel the grain of the rock through the vibrations in the tool. He is working on an H-block. He has been working on this particular block for how long, weeks, months, he does not count. He does not think in terms of schedules or deadlines. He thinks in terms of the stone, what it needs, what it will accept, where it wants to give way and where it resists. He knows this block. He has spent more time with it than he has spent with his wife this season. He knows its flaws. The tiny inclusion of quartz near the left channel that required careful work to avoid. The slight color change in the andesite that indicates a shift in the crystalline structure. He knows it all. And when it is finished, when the last surface has been ground to perfect flatness, when the right angles are true and the channels are uniform and the whole block is ready to take its place in the great structure, he will set down his tools and stretch his aching back and look at what he has made, and he will feel what every craftsman feels at the completion of fine work, that quiet satisfaction, that bone-deep rightness, the knowledge that this stone, this single stone, is as good as human hands can make it, that it will outlast him, that it will outlast his children and his children's children, that 1,000 years from now, someone might touch this surface and marvel at its smoothness and wonder who made it. He was right about that. Here you are, 1,000 years and more later, marveling. And his name, we do not know, we will never know. The Tiwanaku did not write their names in stone. They did not sign their work. They did not record the identities of individual craftsmen or the dates of particular achievements. The mason who cut the finest H-block at Pumapunku is as anonymous as the mason who laid the roughest foundation stone. Both are gone, both are dust. Both have been returned to the earth that held them and that holds them still. But the stone remembers, not the man. Not the name, not the face or the voice or the calloused hands, but the work, the precision, the patient, relentless, extraordinary skill. That is what the stone remembers, that is what the stone preserves, and that is enough. Sleep is very close now, you can feel it, not as an absence but as a presence, a warmth, a weight, a gentle pressure at the edges of your consciousness, like the darkness pressing against the edges of your closed eyelids. Sleep is not something you do. Sleep is something that happens to you, like gravity, like the tide, like the slow cooling of the earth after sunset. You cannot force it. You can only allow it. You can only stop resisting and let it take you the way the earth takes the heat, and the night takes the light, and the centuries take the civilizations that build in stone and dream of permanence. Let it come, let the Altiplano hold you, let the stones keep watch, let the stars wheel overhead in their slow, eternal circuit, Orion rising in the east, the Southern Cross pivoting around the celestial pole, the Milky Way shifting imperceptibly as the Earth turns beneath it. You do not need to watch, you do not need to follow, you do not need to understand. You only need to be here, warm, still, breathing. Held by the earth and covered by the sky, and surrounded by stones that human hands made perfect a very long time ago. One last image, hold it lightly, the way you would hold a feather, the way you would hold a snowflake, the way the Altiplano holds the frost before the sun returns. Lake Titicaca at night, seen from the high ground near Pumapunku, 60 kilometers to the northwest. You cannot see the water from here, but you can see the sky reflected in it, a faint glow on the horizon, not sunrise, not city light, but starlight. Starlight reflected off the surface of the highest navigable lake in the world. The Milky Way doubled, mirrored. The galaxy poured across the sky and then poured again across the water. An infinity of stars above, and an infinity of stars below, and the thin dark line of the horizon, the only thing separating them. The lake is still tonight, perfectly still, not a breath of wind disturbs its surface. The reflected stars do not shimmer or tremble, they burn steadily in the water, as real and as bright as the ones above. If you were standing on the shore of Titicaca right now, looking out across the water, you would not be able to tell which stars were above you and which were below. The sky would be everywhere, the light would be everywhere, you would be floating in stars. The reed boats are pulled up on the shore, dark shapes against the dark earth. The Uru fishermen are sleeping in their reed houses on their reed islands. The Aymara farmers are sleeping in their stone houses on the hillsides above the lake. The llamas are sleeping in their corrals, standing or lying down, their soft wool ruffling in the night air, their dark eyes closed. Everything is sleeping. The entire Altiplano is sleeping. The plateau that stretches for 1,000 kilometers between two walls of mountains, the volcanoes that rise above the western Cordillera, their snow-capped peaks ghostly white against the dark sky, the condors that roost on the high cliffs, their enormous wings folded, their bald heads tucked, the viscachas, the long-tailed, rabbit-like rodents that live in rock crevices and stone walls at high altitude. Curled in their burrows with their soft gray fur fluffed against the cold and their long tails wrapped around their bodies. The flamingos that stand in the shallow salt lakes of the southern Altiplano, 3 species of them, pink and improbable and utterly incongruous in this cold, austere landscape, balanced on one leg, their long necks curved, their heads tucked beneath their wings. All sleeping, all held by the same cold earth, all covered by the same star-filled sky, all breathing the same thin, clean, ancient air. And in the villages near the ruins, in the small Aymara communities that have existed here for centuries, people sleep in adobe houses with tin roofs that ping faintly as they contract in the cooling night air. Families sleep together for warmth, children curled against parents, dogs curled against doorways, the embers of cooking fires glowing faintly in the darkness, the smell of wood smoke and quinoa and earth. These are the descendants of the people who knew the Tiwanaku, who watched the civilization rise and fall, who preserved the stories through the centuries even as the stories changed and shifted and grew mythic. They sleep the easy sleep of people who belong to a place, who know its rhythms, who understand its cold and its wind and its altitude in their bones. Outside their houses, The Altiplano stretches away in every direction, dark and vast and cold and impossibly still, like the surface of a frozen sea, like the floor of an empty cathedral, like the beginning of the world before the first word was spoken and the first stone was cut and the first temple was raised toward the sky. And at Pumapunku, the stones sleep too. If stones can be said to sleep, they do not dream, they do not stir, they do not know that 15 centuries have passed since the hands that shaped them put down their tools and walked away. They do not know that the civilization that built them has fallen. They do not know that the temple they were part of has collapsed. They do not know that strangers have come and measured them and marveled at them and argued about them and written books about them and made films about them and attributed their existence to beings from other worlds. They know nothing, they are stone, andesite and sandstone, volcanic rock and sedimentary rock, atoms arranged in crystalline lattices that have not changed since the magma cooled and the sediment compressed and the earth gave them their form. They are what they are, hard and cold and precise and perfect, cut by human hands into shapes that human minds designed, scattered now, broken in places, eroded in places, but still, after all this time, still precise, still flat, still true. The right angles are still right, after 1500 years, after earthquakes and looting and railway construction and the patient assault of wind and rain and frost. The right angles are still right. The flat surfaces are still flat. The H-blocks are still recognizably H-blocks. Whatever the Tiwanaku did to these stones, however they achieved their extraordinary precision, they built to last. They built for eternity, and eternity, or something close to it, is what they got. You are sleeping now, or so close to sleeping that the difference does not matter. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep has thinned to nothing, like the frost on the stones, like the line between the sky and the lake, like the space between one breath and the next. You are on the threshold, you are at the door, the Puerta del Puma, the door of the Puma, and on the other side, warmth and darkness and rest, and the long, deep, dreamless peace that your body has been asking for all day. Step through, there is nothing to fear on the other side, only rest, only quiet, only the gentle, persistent, ancient silence of a high plateau at night, only the cold air and the warm blankets and the patient stones and the wheeling stars. A shooting star, there, a bright scratch of light across the darkness, burning from north to south in less than a second, a tiny fragment of rock, no larger than a grain of rice, incinerated by its own velocity as it strikes the atmosphere at 60,000 kilometers per hour. For an instant it is the brightest thing in the sky, brighter than any star, brighter than Jupiter hanging low in the west, and then it is gone, nothing left, not even ash, just the memory of light already fading, already uncertain, already blending with the general brightness of the sky until you are not quite sure you saw it at all. The Tiwanaku would have seen shooting stars from this same spot, standing on this same plateau, looking up at this same sky. They would have had a name for them, a story, a meaning. Perhaps they were messages from the gods. Perhaps they were the souls of the dead ascending to the celestial realm. Perhaps they were sparks from the forge where Viracocha hammered out the sun and the moon. We will never know. Their stories are lost, but the shooting stars are not. They continue, night after night, year after year, century after century. Small pieces of the universe burning themselves up against the thin shell of atmosphere that separates us from the void. Let your thoughts drift now. Let them wander where they will. You do not need to direct them. You do not need to organize them or judge them or follow them to any conclusion. Let them come and go like clouds across the plateau, like shadows moving across the grass, like the faint sounds the wind makes as it passes over the stones, whispers that are not quite words, melodies that are not quite music, rhythms that are not quite rhythms, but something older and simpler and more fundamental. The sound of air moving across stone, the sound of the world breathing. Your body is very heavy now. Your limbs feel like stone themselves, dense and warm and motionless. Your eyelids are heavy, your jaw is slack. The muscles of your face have softened to an expression that is neither awake nor asleep, but somewhere in between, a place of perfect neutrality, of utter absence of effort. You are not doing anything. You are not trying to do anything. You are simply here, present, warm, breathing, allowing the night to do what nights do best, which is to carry everything. Gently, slowly, inevitably, toward rest. The Altiplano breathes in and out, the way it has breathed for millions of years, the way it breathed before the Tiwanaku, before the Aymara, before the first human footstep ever pressed into the dry earth of this high, cold, beautiful place. The earth expands slightly with the warmth of the sun, contracts slightly with the cold of the night, a rhythm so slow and so vast that no instrument can measure it, but it is there, a pulse, a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the planet itself. And you are part of it now. Your breathing has synchronized with something larger than yourself. In and out, in and out. Your heartbeat has slowed to a resting rhythm. Your muscles have released their last tension. Your thoughts have softened to wisps, to fragments, to half-formed images that drift through your mind like clouds across the Altiplano sky, appearing, dissolving, leaving no trace. The stones, one last time, see them in your mind, not as ruins, not as scattered fragments of a lost civilization. See them as what they are, a testament, a proof, evidence that human beings, ordinary, mortal, extraordinary human beings, can take the hardest materials the earth provides and shape them into something that outlasts everything. The empires fall, the languages are forgotten, the religions fade, the faces of the builders are lost forever, but the stones remain. Cut to a precision that 1,500 years of entropy has barely diminished. True and flat and right-angled and perfect. Human, completely and utterly human, and all the more wonderful for it. Sleep now, sleep the way the stones sleep, patient, untroubled, held by the earth. Sleep the way the lake sleeps in its basin between the mountains, still, deep, reflecting stars. Sleep the way the Altiplano sleeps, vast, quiet, cold on the surface and warm at the core, wrapped in starlight and silence and the thin, clean air that has blown across this plateau since before the mountains rose. The llama wool holds your warmth, the earth holds your weight, the night holds everything, and the stones of Pumapunku, the stones that should not exist, the stones that prove what human hands can do when guided by human minds of extraordinary patience and skill. The stones keep watch. They have kept watch for 1,500 years. They will keep watch tonight. They will keep watch while you sleep and while you dream and while the stars cross the sky and the Southern Cross pivots, and the Milky Way pours its ancient light across the highest plateau in the Americas. You are safe, you are warm, you are held. The thin air enters your lungs and leaves your lungs, enters and leaves, the oldest rhythm, the simplest rhythm, the rhythm that began with your first breath and will continue unbroken until your last. But do not think about that now. Do not think about anything now. Just breathe, just rest. Just let the night carry you the way the Altiplano carries the stones, and the lake carries the starlight, and the wind carries the silence across the high, cold, empty, beautiful, ancient plain. Pumapunku, the door of the Puma. The stones that should not exist. Cut by human hands, placed by human strength, dreamt by human minds. Sleeping now, as you are sleeping, as the builders slept, as the masons slept after a long day of striking stone, as the farmers slept after a long day in the raised fields, as the priests slept after a long night of watching the stars, as the llamas slept and the condors slept and the lake lay still and the frost formed on the stones and the Milky Way poured across the sky like a river of light and the Southern Cross burned above the mountains and the earth turned slowly beneath it all. Sleeping, all of it, everything. And the Altiplano wind, gentle as breath, cold as starlight, old as the mountains themselves, moves across the plateau, across the grass, across the stones, across you, carrying everything toward morning, carrying everything towards sleep. Rest now, the stones will be here when you wake. They have waited 1,500 years. They can wait one more night. They are patient beyond all human understanding of patience. They are stone, and stone does not hurry, stone does not worry, stone simply endures. The air is thin, the stars are close, the silence is complete. And the stones of Pumapunku, the impossible, beautiful human stones, hold their perfect angles in the dark. Waiting, patient, still.